kindred friends, and welcome to the Radical Emergence podcast, where we're having conversations at the edge of transformation. We are your hosts. I'm Dr. Jen Pierre-Rich, and with me is my friend, co-host, and co-collaborator, Dr. Sally Adnams Jones. Please check out our bios in the show notes where you'll find links to our work, websites, and can find ways to connect with us. If you're not already following, hit that subscribe button, ring that bell, and join our mailing list so you can stay up to date on new episodes as they drop.
Hello, everybody. Sally here. This exciting project consists of about 26 episodes in all, dedicated to better defining and understanding transformation on all its levels of reality. That's personal, social, as well as ecological. We're going to ask, what is transformation? Why bother? Why do we need it? And what does it feel like or look like? We'll also ask, can we induce it or perhaps accidentally block it? These are really important questions for growth.
We draw not only on our hard-won life experience, we are also transdisciplinarians. So what the heck is that? Well, it means we want to understand transformation from as many lenses as possible, including formal academic disciplines and discourses, art, media, and popular culture. Importantly, we draw from our living experience.
So we are experts, so to speak, but mostly in just one small but highly critical area, our own suffering, and the medicines that we've both used to transform our own lives. So to this end, we've also added decades of committed practices, as well as formal degrees, including specific in-depth studies in the mechanisms of transformation, because we needed to understand this healing journey for ourselves.
Does this entitle us to help others? You bet. Absolutely. Because it is by sharing our stories, knowledge, and direct experience that we offer sane, sober, practical tools for living on the ground of life. So welcome. Strap in, hang on, and enjoy the ride as we deep dive into a universe of transformation.
Welcome back, everybody. It's so awesome to be back in this little chair with my darling friend Jen and colleague and wise woman and wild woman. It's such a pleasure to be back in dialogue. And what gives it such beauty is that Jen and I are literally passionate about this topic. And we share that. And that's what brings so much joy to both of us, is that we share this passion and we get to dialogue and hopefully share that excitement and the awe that we feel at this miracle that we call life with you. It's our purpose. So when you're aligned with your purpose, you can't help but be excited about what you do. So here we are, episode 12 out of 26. We're about halfway. And Jen and I have spent half a year already in dialogue about this thing that is the most important thing in our lives, which is looking at transformation from as many paradigms and angles and lenses as we can, and bring that to you. We've done the digesting, the reading, the studying, the hours of treading up and down hallways, asking people about the subject, listening, and here we are. We're bringing it to you, and it is our pleasure. So just to quickly recap, this whole podcast is dedicated to evolution. And evolution can be understood at different scales. The macro scale of the physical evolution of the galaxy that we walk around in on this planet, the physical state of the universe, so to speak, is evolving all the time, in flux. And there's a field of transformation all around us in which we walk, talk, sleep, cry, make love. And at that meso scale, the middle scale, is the human. And the human is a fractal of that giant scale of evolution. And we have a fractal identity within that field. And we have agency, and we participate, and we co-create evolution through our own bodies and lives. And Jen and I, to this day, just find that the most fascinating possibility. And that's why we sit here gabbering about it for a year. It's endless and it's fascinating. And then, of course, there's the micro level, which we haven't dealt with much because Jen and I admit that we're not quantum physicists. We're not even evolutionary biologists. So we're generalists, but we will acknowledge there's this field at the micro level too, that is constantly in flux and supporting the meso level, which is you and me, as well as the micro level, the macro level. So in other words, the physiosphere supports the biosphere, which is you and I, which supports the psychosphere or noosphere, people have given it different names, or culture, or the mind and all its products, as well as its spiritual development of those structures. So there's a structure to this constant flow of information and forms. And that is the universe in which we live. So let's take another look at that. It's unbelievable. We live in a field of constant flux and we participate as best we can. So today, if that sounds complicated, before we start, I'd just like to give this image. If you cut down a tree, you slice its trunk, and you have a look at those rings inside the tree. That's kind of like a nested series of circumferences that keep expanding until you reach the maximum growth. So if you imagine you're like that tree, in your core is this biological flow, the energy, the nervous system, the brain, that is itself just stimulated and alive. And then there's your body and the nutrients that keep flowing and changing. And then there's your context and your creativity and relationships that reach out into your context. And then there's your community, your city that is constantly transforming, that you're participating in with your energy and creativity and your service. And then there's the whole environment, the ecology of that. And Jen and I have always made it clear that we feel that we participate in an entire psychological, ecological field that we navigate, that we co-create, that we participate in, and that we're responsible for too, because we're aware human beings. So keeping that image in mind of the rings of the tree, or you could think of nested Russian dolls, whatever, in this womb of the universe. We are fractals. That's kind of what a fractal identity means, is that we're held by this entire creative force. And we ourselves are part of that creative force. So that's just recapitulating what we see as transformation. It's personal and it's psychological and ecological, and in fact is cosmological. So, there's ways we can look at this the different lenses. And today we're going to be using those lenses again. We've looked at the transformation from the biological and the creative and the identity structures. And today we're going to look at what blocks transformation. Because we've tried to describe that in our limited way. We've done the best we can for half a year so far, but it's a lot. It's a lot to take in. So we're going to go slowly today, because if we understand what blocks our transformation, we can try to reverse those blockages or work with them and actively engage consciously with our transformation. We can try to remove some of the blockages. So if you kind of imagine a hose pipe, we've had this metaphor before. A hose pipe that gets a lot of kinks in it will not flow nicely into the garden. You can turn on the tap, but it's going to get bulges in it if there's a kink, and then it's either going to dribble in little erratic spurts, or if you suddenly unblock the kink, it's going to have a fire hose effect for a while. But then the flow will become steady. So when we talk about what blocks transformation, we're talking about how to unkink the natural hose pipe of flow and creativity that we are. So we're going to divide that up into little topics, and Jen and I will throw this backwards and forwards. One way to describe that is the bio, psycho, social, and political quadrants. You could imagine a map. Those are the different ways we can look at you and your transformation. There's biological transformation, psychological, social, and political or ecological going on at the same time. So we're going to break it up into these 4 quadrants. And we will actually prefer to use different language. Jen will introduce that to you. Just make it simpler. That's really what we're doing, to use as many lenses as possible to help you digest this information. So I've had a wonderful quiet summer here writing my book about transformation called Integral Taoism, which talks about these fractals, the transformation of and the sexuality and the creativity and the flow. That's my topic. But while I've been writing about it, Jen has actually been living some transformation. So I'm going to hand it over to you, Jen, to say hi to everybody and then start our episode 12 together.
Thank you, my beloved friend and co-creator. I'm so glad to be here with you. And yeah, as you can see, I'm in a different place, and I have moved states to the beautiful sunshine state of Florida. And yeah, it's been a big transformational summer for both of us. And Sally and I have often mused that when you dance with transformation, transformation wants to dance with you. And we have really experienced that since we've, really since we've devoted our lives way before this podcast to transformation. We have been dancing with transformation, and that impulse has only strengthened as we've gone deeper into this relationship with transformation. And that really begs the question in my mind, does transformation want to participate with us as much as we want to participate with it? Is there something sentient and intelligent about transformation that enjoys that kind of participation? Just something I've been thinking about lately, because we certainly seem to be experiencing that, Sally and I, in our own lives. So we are really glad to be back with you on this deep dive into the universe of transformation. Yeah, Sally, that was a beautiful opening and a great summary of kind of what we have established so far in the previous episodes, and sets up really well why we're here at this moment, at this point in the podcast, in the trajectory of the knowledge that we've downloaded so far in the podcast, why it's important to talk about what gets in the way of transformation. So thank you for setting that up for us. the paradox, of course, or in this podcast, we call the pair of ducks. The paradox is that, of course, nothing can hinder and stop transformation. So when we ask the question, what gets in the way, what stops transformation? It's kind of a trick question, because really nothing gets in the way of transformation. It is kind of like an unstoppable train on all levels of reality, as Sally has been pointing us to, personal reality, psychological reality, social reality, cultural reality, ecological reality, cosmological reality. All those realities are constantly in this flux of transformation. And as Sally pointed out again, with the image of the tree rings, that we are fields of transformation within the field of transformation. We're like those holons, as we had a whole show about being holons, right? So we are holonically nested fields of transformation. And we are being informed by and informing our environment all the time and participating with transformation. But sometimes things get in the way that that hinder that. So that's what today's show is all about. In Tibetan Buddhism, there's a concept called Shenpa. And Shenpa is all of the things that we are attached to, that hook us, that grab us and keep us stuck in a particular pattern. So in one of the practices is trying to look out for where we get hooked and paying attention to those places. So that's kind of what this show is about, is looking for those places where we get hooked on all levels of reality. But first, I just want to start with exploring the personal lens. How do we get stuck personally? What prevents our personal transformation? And I have to say that, well, the pursuit of awareness, self-awareness, and sharing my journey towards and into self-awareness, that, as you know, is my passion. So when it comes to what prevents or hinders personal transformation, this, of course, is at the top of my list, is the absence of that inner awareness. So if we don't have that awareness, we're not prepared, perhaps, to know what needs attention, right? I may not be able to identify those points of transformation if I'm not aware of myself on the inside. When they present themselves, I can't leverage those moments for maximum efficiency for my healing and my growth if I'm not aware of them. So self-awareness, not having that self-awareness on board, I think, is a huge obstacle to personal transformation. James Baldwin, one of my beloved teachers, said that not everything that is faced can be changed, but nothing can be changed until it is faced, right? So on my own journey, it has been essential to name and claim that post-traumatic stress, PTSD, that has been running my life, the intense hypervigilance that consumes me almost continuously. I have to name that, right? I have to name it and claim it. I have to name and claim those parts of me and be in relationship with those parts of me so that I can start to address them at the root where they live inside of me, right? So that is how I am moving with transformation, right? So another thing that I think prevents personal transformation are the negative self-beliefs that we carry. So in many cases, those negative self-beliefs that we carry and the negative inner voice that many of us have are instilled in us while we are very young as children. And so we don't even realize that the negative self-talk and the negative inner voice that we have isn't even our own. It is the voice of our caretakers, right? But we continue perpetuating that negative self-talk and that negative
inner voice. And it's until we become conscious of it, right, that then again we can start to move with our transformation by becoming aware of that pattern. And another thing that prevents personal transformation is that many of us are really afraid to change. And, looking in my own life, it's because change is uncomfortable and it's super disrupting to everything in our ordinary reality when we step out of our comfort zone. And I know this right now because of this move where I've, left the world that I knew and I'm starting in a new place. But it was because I was aware of my discomfort with change and my hesitancy to step out of my comfort zone that I was able to notice that pattern, become aware of it, and then start to move with transformation, right? But if I had stayed in that fear of change, it would have been very difficult to step outside of my comfort zone. Of course, it's also possible to be prevented from seeking transformation by the external pressures we experience. It's a lot easier to move with transformation and change when we are in environments with people who support change and our transformation. If we're with people who expect us to stay the same, that kind of resistance against change can really set us up to not move with transformation, right? So procrastination, there's all kinds of things that get in the way of us moving with transformation. Just even our human tendency to seek out short-term solutions rather than taking a long-term view of ourselves and the world, that can prevent us from moving with transformation. But I have to say, finally, as I finish this up, that I think the biggest barrier to personal transformation is unresolved trauma and not having the support we need in terms of our family and friends and mentors, not having the support network we need to address our trauma. So those of us who are dealing with our trauma, we have an additional layer of complexity that is added to the transformation process when we're dealing with our trauma and trying to move with transformation. That's a lot. So we're not only moving with transformation, but we're doing that while we're also healing ourselves and healing all of this complex trauma that we're living with. But I also think on the flip side of that, those of us who have experienced complex trauma perhaps have the capacity to move more dynamically with transformation than those who've not experienced trauma. I don't know, it's just a theory, but I don't think traumatic experiences are ever good or good for us, but I do think we learn some skills through that trauma. And perhaps one skill is the ability to move more fluidly with transformation. So that's my hit at what inhibits personal transformation. And I'm super excited, Sally, to pass it back over to you and go deeper into our exploration of what hinders transformation.
Thanks, Jen. That was absolutely beautiful. And I think you've covered it all really beautifully. So I'll just highlight what I heard you say. So we're looking at the bio and psycho inner ring of that field of expansion that is the tree ring. So this is the body. And as you mentioned, Jen, the trauma is one of the biggest blockages. And trauma does a lot to us. And we're going to dedicate several of our upcoming episodes to just look at trauma, because a lot of enlightenment teachers or other teachers on transformation will just say, no, you must just bypass that. It's not enlightenment. We don't want to look at the psychological blockages. We just want to go straight for enlightenment or for growth or for transformation. And Jen and I will argue it's actually not possible to do that. It's one of the major blockages. And if you don't attend to that with love and compassion, you start getting distorted. And we know many people who claim enlightenment who are fairly distorted in some ways because they just bypassed their childhood, their traumas. So Jen and I will emphasize that this is part of the beginning of expansion. Healthy expansion is looking at the inner rings, the nervous system, how we become hypervigilant from trauma, how we cannot any longer be present to our lives because trauma is keeping us triggered, it's carrying on in the background, and it's determining that we're stuck in fight and flight or reactivity. So we can't soften and open and come into flow. We literally can't. Our nervous system is stuck in a crisis that happened on a subliminal level. And we're actually operating in our present world from the past when we're traumatized. So coming into the present moment fully requires that you look at your past and heal it. And we're going to have a whole episode on how our gifts actually come from that wound, from the healing. It's a very interesting dynamic, as Jen said, that those of us, and I include myself here, who've experienced a ton of trauma, if you learn how to work with that, it can become your gift. So we're not looking down on that. We're not bypassing it. We're not saying it's irrelevant to enlightenment or growth or transformation. It's part of it. It's an integral part of it. It's healing the nervous system and looking at our adverse early childhood experiences. That's called ACEs. Our audience can Google that, ACES, ACEs. There are 10 of them. Have a look at those, look at your checklist. All children have 1 or 2. And if you've got 4 or 5, you really need to get support. So why we talk about that is because it affects your safety levels. It affects how you trust the universe. It affects what you fear and doubt about yourself and your possibilities. And it also takes an enormous amount of energetic resources. So once we've dealt with what happened to us, our story, we can liberate some of that energy, the kinks in the hose pipe. So it's really critical that we look at, when we talk about the biopsycho aspect of transformation, the actual body, its ability to be present with our lives, to be stable and secure despite all the chaos. That's the number one skill for transformation. And sadly, that involves looking at our traumas and what is preventing us from being fully present in our own lives. So those are the inner rings. Let's go now to the next ring in this tree. And if you think about it, there's also this vertical flow in a tree from roots to trunk to branches. So there's the vertical flow, there's the horizontal expansion. All axes need to be looked at for flow. And so we're going to move now to the next couple of rings, which are the social or cultural rings. And I'd like to give that back to Jen to lead off on that.
Perfect. Oh, I love that. Yeah, we're flowing on all axes, wide open, moving with transformation. And I love how you have pointed us to the fact that we're not about bypassing here. You know, we're going into the mud. We're not afraid to go to the mud. You know, we are lotuses born in the mud. And without that mud, we can't fully bloom. And so we... yeah, I love how you said too, how coming into presence means bringing our past into presence with us. And so much of my healing has been about reclaiming those wounded parts of myself and bringing them back with me into presence, you know. And I think a lot of times that's why those parts of us yell out and scream out and reach out through sometimes wild and bizarre behaviors because they desperately want to live in the present with us, right? So these parts of ourselves scream out in various ways because they want to come into the present and live, and they deserve to live. You know, those wounded parts of me deserve to live in the present moment with me. They deserve to be in the light with me. So yeah, we're not taking a bypassing approach on this podcast. Yeah, in fact, we take an opposite approach. We play in the mud. So let's talk about, how do we move with socio-cultural transformation, social transformation, cultural transformation? So in the same way that personal transformation is incredibly complex and influenced by a variety, an infinite variety of factors, social transformation and cultural transformation is also deeply complex. Social transformation is hampered by a number of factors. There are political factors, cultural factors, institutional factors, military factors, economic interests, education, religion, power structures that are unjust and unequal, patriarchy, white supremacy. All of these are influenced by laws, regulations, policies, standards, norms, as well as people and groups that can be resistant to change for a variety of reasons. So when we talk about what hinders transformation, we have to look at all of these lenses I've just described and see how they are either hindering or moving with that tide of transformation. So moving with the pace of change often means changing power structures, which is going to be opposed by those who are holding power, right? So challenging those powers, moving with change is going to be challenging those power structures, and that's probably going to lead to what we see often, especially here in the US, which is a tightening of conformity demands, right? Because the people, the power stakeholders who are in control don't want that change. So another thing that hinders sociocultural transformation is that, honestly, we're just really overwhelmed. I know I'm overwhelmed in my life with the various crises that we're facing as a species on this planet. It's very difficult to keep up with an ever-changing world, with the fast influx of transformation and change that we're experiencing right now. It's easy to become apathetic, easy to think that making change doesn't matter in this world. And I think just in my life, as I think about how I deal with that, how do I deal with not falling into that trap of apathy that is so easy to fall into? I think one way that I do that is by making intentional small changes in my life that have big impact. So like things I eat, my diet, what I consume, the products I consume, the media I consume, the people I consume, not like literally, I don't eat people, but you know what I mean, who I'm around, my environmental footprint. All of these things are factors that I can influence personally, that together, they're all small, but together they have a cumulative impact. So this is how I'm moving with transformation and not falling into that trap of apathy, by finding small ways to make big change. So needless to say, all of the various factors that are influencing sociocultural change and hindering sociocultural change are many. And so this is a complex topic and really difficult to totally speak to here on this podcast. But just as we have always talked about, there are fractal relationships between each of these levels of reality, right? So as I transform on a personal level, I then am transforming in the way I engage with the world, and I'm transforming on a sociocultural level. And in a minute, we're going to go even deeper to ecological change and what prevents ecological change. And likewise, there's that fractal relationship with the ecological world as well. So yeah, that's it. That's what I've got for what hinders sociocultural transformation. And I'm going to throw it back to you, Sally, to talk about it further.
Thanks, Jen. And as before, you've covered everything I think is important too. So I'm going to just reiterate and maybe bring this image back for our listeners to really feel this about the tree. So when we take responsibility for that inner flow up the trunk, there is growth and there are branches outwards. So kind of the political, sociological, cultural impact of our personal flow is as we start branching out and reaching into relationship with our family, with our neighborhood, our communities, and the politics of our country and the global situation. So when we start doing that, bringing our own personal transformation forward, honoring that, healing that, opening up the flow of our own gifts to other. So this is the section where we look at how do we relate with other. And we feel that flow can be blocked. So what is that? Our personal flow moving forward into relationship with other, we feel that intuitively. There's a glass ceiling there. There's family dynamics there that are not being supportive or blocking our flow, or there's projection from that community because we're growing. So we're feeling into the blockages all around us for our growth. And some of that is healthy. So we're not going to pathologize all the blockages, because we do need to be contained. We can't just do whatever we want and grow however haphazardly we want. So if you think of a tree, I do a lot of hiking here on Vancouver Island. And when you go up into the alpine, you notice those trees are quite buckled and they're little and they're stunted, but they're old and they're beautifully unique. And we call it krippelhout. It's trees that lived on the ridge, they've had wind that shaped them. The wind has blown them to the side. The lack of nutrients above the tree level in the soil have made them little but wide and strong. They're unique, they're gorgeous. They're a bit like bonsai. So we are being shaped all the time by otherness, our family, our neighborhood, our culture, our religions. So when we talk about that next ring, we are shaped by our context and we shape our context. We have power, we have agency. So there's this dynamic between me and other all the time. And as Jen beautifully said, the political has a lot to do with that. How are the laws structured? Are you free to own a property as a woman or get a credit card or vote? So a lot of feminine energy recently has been about changing those circumstances so that we can grow and flow, and we're doing that beautifully. Other communities are being called on to grow right now, and it's difficult and painful. How do men adjust to women's growth and agency? They need to grow too, and we grow together and we keep shaping each other. It's dynamic. That is communal flow between parties, and that includes an understanding of power and how that shapes us, because it gives or takes away opportunity for growth to different communities. We look at how slavery has meant that there's a legacy of poverty for our our brethren here in North America who are of color, for example. So politics has shaped their opportunities, and we're trying to right that. It's justice that those people who have suffered under colonization have had glass ceilings par excellence. How do we remove the glass ceiling and allow that growth, like the tree, to fully blossom instead of having all these glass ceilings that affect our opportunities to grow? So that's really what politics and power are about, is preventing certain groups to transform, because some other groups are invested in preventing transformation for everybody. That's how entitlement and privilege is maintained. If we want to shore up our opportunities and we psychologically believe there's not enough opportunities to go around, we're going to prevent your transformation. This is changing, and it's dynamic. And as Jen said, we're facing this time in our history where the glass ceiling is coming right off of every community, and our creativity and opportunities are about to be unleashed. And there's a backlash going on, and that's inevitable. People are trying to maintain their positions and prevent change, because as Dr. Jen said, change is scary because it means entering the unknown with imagination. And it does take energetic resources. And I think at the bottom of our fear of change, I've been thinking about this summer, it's because we know we only have so many energetic resources and financial resources. There are limits to growth, and change asks us to draw on those resources. We've got to be more creative. We've got to have some energy. We've got to invite discomfort and spend some of our resources. And those resources could be attention, time, energy, finances, all the resources you can imagine. Change uses some of those. So we get stuck, and we call that fear of change. It's fear of spending resources, really, sharing resources. So, you know, Jen and I could talk for months about the political blockages to transformation, and we're not going to do that today. We kind of drop a little bit of that into each of our sessions because they're real, and all of us are waking up to the fact that we all have the right to transform. Really, that's at the bottom of the political power structures, is the prevention of transformation for some. So we've looked at trauma, we've looked at being stuck in fight and flight, and which is fear, and how family dynamics can also shape that. Without support, we don't necessarily have the opportunities to grow. So we have to look at family systems, we have to look at political systems. We're now entering systems. When we talk about not just the personal, but cultural and social, we're looking at systems of change. And that's complex, and we will unfold that slowly over time. So now let's look at the biggest picture, the ecological. And this is Jen's specialty, so I'm going to hand it right back to Jen.
We all have the right to transform. Like, I feel like that should be on a t-shirt. I want to tattoo it on my soul. I feel like that is exactly why we have done this podcast, is that we all believe so strongly that we all have the right to transform, and how these institutions and stakeholders of power are so afraid of that, and have really inhibited the transformation of so many groups of people. And how I feel like our work and really celebrating transformation is kind of uprooting that whole system at the roots. And I love doing that with you. I love pointing out this with you unabashedly in this podcast, how we are standing up for the right to transform on our own terms. Yeah, that's beautiful. And I wrote down something. Oh yes, I also wanted to mention too how I loved how you were talking about how we're all shaped and being shaped by otherness, right? And so it's this beautiful dance that we're doing with others, and that others are shaping us, and we are shaping others, and there's this beautiful flow that happens when you stop thinking about the steps and just get into the dance together of shaping and transforming with each other. I think that's what we do in our relationship, Sally. I think that's what we've done in this podcast, is that we are kind of effortlessly doing that shaping and being shaped by each other. So that's super radical, I think. Yeah, I have to say that we have kind of a limited amount of time to get our shit together as a species on this planet. Let's talk about what prevents ecological change. Because our chances of being able to continue to exist on this beautiful planet we call home as a species are very slim if we do not get our shit together. So what is keeping us from making the changes that we need to make? So, well, let's talk about that. One of the primary obstacles is that we are fundamentally estranged from our primary ecological bonds. And when we talk about the dominant power structures and stakeholders of power who don't want us to change, those are the very forces that want to keep us separate from our ecological bonds in place, right? Because if we don't know who we really are as ecologically intelligent beings, then it's easier to perpetuate these crimes against our earth home because we're not paying attention, right? So the power stakeholders want to keep us separate, at least perceptually, from our earth home. Probably one of our most primitive and essential human activities is to move with transformation, which is why it is such an injustice to prevent that transformation from happening. The laws and rhythms of nature govern the transformation of all animals, and we are included in that. And so as a species, often we're so focused on, short-term gains and extraction and what we can exploit from the earth and from our natural resources that we don't even stop to consider what we can give back. There's no reciprocal relationship there with our earth home. It's just what we can take, right? And that's not moving in harmony and balance with transformation, right? That one-way relationship. So we have to restore the balance between humans and nature and restore ecological sanity so that we can move with ecological transformation. Those stakeholders, those power stakeholders and the economic interests they represent, as well as the industries that benefit from the status quo, they are not interested in change. Right? They want to keep things the same. And they are willing to spend a lot of time, a lot of money, a lot of influence to keep things the same. Right? So one thing that prevents ecological transformation are the powers that be that want us to keep thinking, acting, and doing the same, keeping things the same. Right? So that loops us back to earlier in our conversation where we were talking about what often inhibits personal change is stepping outside of our comfort zone, right? And those power holders that want to keep things the same are really depending on us being apathetic and staying in our comfort zone, right? So one way we can move with ecological transformation for the benefit of the planet is to intentionally step outside of our comfort zone. Yeah, it's really hard to make ecological changes when we feel separate from our earth home, and when we feel better and superior to our animal kinfolk. And I believe that lie of separation needs to be addressed and corrected before we can move sanely with transformation, right? That lie of separation, that we're separate from our earth home, that has to be addressed, to bring that into the forefront of our consciousness and talk about it, right? Einstein said that the measure of intelligence is the ability to change. So if we want to measure our intelligence as a species, we have to look at our comfort level with making the changes that we need to make in order to survive on this planet for many generations forward. So it is a huge catalyst for great collective change when we can address this illusion of being separate. And this is the marrying of our ecological intelligence with our spiritual intelligence and coming together to restore that balance that we desperately need as a species. I believe that is our best hope for righting this ship that we are on together as a species on this beautiful planet. Well, this has been an incredible show, and I'm going to throw it back to Sally for some final thoughts. And we look forward to seeing you again on our next episode of the Radical Emergence podcast. Thank you. Be well. Back to you, Sally.
Thanks, Jen. I think this is probably the critical little section of our podcast today, because everything else will hinge on whether we can change in time or not. With this layer of our rings of the trunk, which is our environment, because we're suffering under an illusion that has been generated since, we'd call it modernist thinking, hyper individuality, which is an illusion that we can survive and thrive as separate beings, as you said beautifully, Jen. We have a legacy of this thinking right from before industrialization, when we were saying that if I think I am, we've separated the mind from the body. And as Ian McGilchrist would say, his beautiful work on the left and the right brain, what happened is that we valued the left brain over the right brain. And this has distorted our entire thinking. So in other words, we have these two hemispheres in the brain, and they have their own gifts. They're both beautiful and valuable. But through our epochal era of modernism and the legacy of patriarchal valuing of only the left brain, which is analysis, it's looking to the outside world to find resources and problem solve. It's beautiful. But when you only start valuing that, you've cut off relationship with the rest of the universe. So the left brain is focused on problem solving, survival, and gaining resources. And to do that, it neglects the right brain, which is about relationship, ecology, the big picture thinking, or the yin. We call that the yin, which is about relationship to the earth or to the values that women bring, which is gentleness, feeling. So over time, we've moved into the left brain as a species, including women. So this is not about men. This is about humans who have started to value the mind, analysis, and problem solving over relationship. This has destroyed our relationship to the earth. So we have become, as humans, very successful at hoarding resources and extrapolating those from the planet, destroying the skin of the planet and its forests and its water. And we're still in competitive thinking survival mode. So we're hoarding resources all the time. And this will be our downfall. So the left brain is beautiful, but when it begins to dominate, it tends to only do short-term thinking. It hoards resources. It divides everything into parts, doesn't see the whole picture anymore. And it devalues anything that values relationship. So this problem is internal in all of us. I'm not denigrating men. So that word patriarchy, there's a lot of triggers around it. Patriarchy is not running men down. It's understanding what has happened to all humans over time. So when we move into our left brain, we do a bunch of stuff, which is objectify the universe. We turn it into objects for our own use. That includes animals. It includes soil and land and other people with different values. And we lose our feeling. We begin to become disembodied. This is the problem at, the root cause of our dilemma right now is that we have denied sentience in every other living being. In our desire to dominate. So part of the healing is to understand we need to re-inhabit our right brain. We need to re-inhabit our body and start to feel our hearts again, feel connection with land, with animals, with plants. And that's how we start to do systems thinking, which is the next level of our human development, is to see the illusion that hyper-individuality is. It's a product of late-stage capitalism. And we are deconstructing that right now, beginning to be more aware of social support for others, learning how to be reconnected with the land base, learning that there is nothing we can do to make ourselves separate. There is nothing. We've tried for 400 years through all our industrialization, and look where that false illusion has led us. So when we talk about ecological transformation, it means we have to actually move into our right brain. This is the fractal nature of transformation. There is no transformation without the core transforming of the human, of all genders, and learning how to cooperate and learning how to relate and how to love and how to acknowledge sentience in every single being and value them. We have to re-establish value in all living beings. So we look forward to coming together again next week. And we will be discussing one of the particular blockages, which is trauma, so we're going to start at that coloring again and unpack that, because without knowing how we've all been traumatized by patriarchal systems of thinking and capitalism and family structures, which are suffering under the pressures of not enough time and attention, because that's the context is pressuring families, and families that are pressured create trauma. So let's unpack that a little bit next week. We will look specifically at trauma. And I just want to thank you all for your time and attention. Time and attention is scarce. It's one of our precious resources. And thank you for giving us a bit of your resources, your time and attention. So we'll see you again, and take care until we do, and loving you all. And till next time, bye-bye. So thanks for joining us. And we hope you can take away some helpful tools, perhaps some great stories, and some wisdom for your own ongoing journey.
Join us for our next episode, where we will deep dive again into a universe of transformation.